Okay, welcome everyone to Painfully Funny, Exploring Slapstick in the Movies. This is Professor Richard Edwards, and I'm here today with Club Slapstick Fan Panel number 1. And I have two very exciting guests that I want to share with everyone right now. So let me stop the screen sharing and introduce to you our two fan panelists for our first conversation here. We have first Pat Rosebank, and she is a comedy historian, voice artist, actor, writer, and ADHD advocate. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Nice to be here, finally.
And then we also have with us today Jason Tucker, who is an alumni of TCM's first online film course, Investigating Film Noir. So welcome back, Jason, and I'm excited to have you as a guest as well.
Thank you very much. I am happy to be here as well.
So we're going to get started with you, Pat, and if you'll just introduce your topic and your presentation, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, my topic, this actually began a long time ago, not that long ago. My first year at University of Toronto, I looked at the course catalog, and there was one course I was dying to take, Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd, Masters of the Gag. However, there was a prerequisite of Film 101. So I took Film 101 knowing that the other course was offered every other year, only they never ever offered it again after I saw it listed in first year. So I would cut classes and go to the library and study comedy films. Now, one thing I did get out of Film 101 was the prof, Bart Testa. He told us about this technique for mapping the action in a comedy film, and then he turned us loose and said, now try it. So I tried it on Laurel and Hardy's Leave 'Em Laughing. It's a 1928 silent film, and it deals with Laurel's toothache and what happens. Now, I will share my screen with you here. Let's hope this works. Whoops. Share screen should be share screen. We'll see if this works. Share it and go to here. Hopefully you will be able to see my wonderful chart that I did. It's much more legible than the one I did in film studies, let me tell you.
Yeah, so we see it just fine, Pat. It looks good.
Yeah, good. Now, what we see here is the structure of silent comedy films and slapstick films is that you have your timeline, but each sequence is its own self-contained unit hooked onto that timeline. So in this case, we see the first sequence takes place in Laurel and Hardy's bedroom of, I guess they're, they live in a boarding house or a flop house or what have you. And they do share a bed, but back in that era, it was quite common for people of the same sex to share a bed. It was just, you stay warm and you save money and you don't need a separate bed. So in this sequence, in the bedroom, or scene rather, you'll see that there's 4 separate little loops of plot that happen in it, and a couple of them overlap. So what happens in this scene is we see them, it's the middle of the night, and Laurel is in agony. And Hardy has had enough of this. He goes into the bathroom to get a hot water bottle for his friend. And in the bathroom, what happens is he goes into the bathroom, steps on a tack on the way in. Exasperated, he throws the tack away. Opens the medicine cabinet, and the door swings back and nails him in the back of the head. Fills the hot water bottle, slams the medicine cabinet, and again the door hits him in the back of the head. Then on the way out, he steps on the tack again. So it's kind of a circular form there. Then we get the sequence with the hot water bottle. He gives the hot water bottle to Laurel, turns out the lights. Laurel rests his head on the water bottle on the pillow. The stopper falls out of the water bottle. And then we get this beautiful, beautiful nonverbal story of discovery. And Oliver Hardy does it just with his face. And you can see all these different things go over his face. He wonders, wait a minute, something's wrong here. What is this? It's wet, it's warm, There's a lot of it. He peeks to make sure it didn't come out of him, and it didn't. And then he, disgusted, he looks, and then he sees the bed is full of water. Oh, it's the hot water bottle. And he kind of takes this out on Laurel, but, you know, think about it. Who put the stopper in the bottle? The one that filled it. Ollie. He tells Stan, go and ache in the corner. Now, if you leave Stan to his own devices, he's going to get into trouble. He decides he's going to try and pull the tooth by tying the window shade string to it. Of course, it brings down the window shade, so Ollie gets up and he's going to help his friend. Then you get the whole business of trying to remove the tooth by tying a string around the tooth and around the doorknob, slamming the door. And we get the repetition again, because first of all, Stan just sort of follows the door, so nothing happens. Then Ollie says, all right, you hang on to this dresser and stay put. Slam the door, and something does fall, the doorknob. The noise brings in the landlord. And then you have another self-contained little bit where the landlord threatens them, says, you're out in the morning. In the morning you move. Then he turns to leave, and Stan kicks him in the behind. Landlord assumes Ollie kicked him in the behind, kicks Ollie, who kicks the landlord, who kicks Ollie. And this continues until Stan punches the landlord in the jaw, and the landlord is dazed, staggers away, starts to move forward, but ends up staggering backwards down the hall. Stan is kind of impressed by his own strength, so he tries it on Ollie, who punches him, knocks him out, and drags him back to bed. And remember that water bottle? As Ollie is about to get into bed again, he steps on it, and again, another slightly rude bit of humor, it squirts him right up underneath the nightshirt. Yeah. Another rather exasperated camera look from Ollie. He gets into bed, the two of them are in bed, turn off the lights, lie down, bed collapses in a heap. That's the end of the whole bedroom sequence. Then we have the sequence in the dentist's office, where brave men's hearts go pit-a-pat. So we have a sequence in the waiting room, where it just totally sets up the terrors to come. We see a man telling his friend, well, the dentist broke my brother's jaw yesterday. Stan tries to leave. Ollie tells him, you're not going anywhere. Then we get a patient who goes in quite normally, and we hear, well, we would hear screaming if it were a sound film. In this case, we just see Stan and Ollie's reactions of shock. Door opens, patient comes out, and there's this spectacular wrestling match between the patient and the dentist. It's incredibly physical. Patient gets overpowered and dragged in, but a moment later, he escapes. The dentist says, you're next. Stan looks at the dentist and the pliers and faints, and Ollie has to carry him in. And you'll see this actually mirrors the end, or the bit in the bedroom scene where Ollie has to drag Stan to bed because Stan is knocked out. Then in the dentist's office, there's the whole sequence of trying to get Stan into the chair, and there's a routine where first one leg goes up, you press that leg down, the other leg goes up. So we get the ritualistic repetition there. Then, recipe for disaster, Ollie decides to take charge. And he tells the dentist, you go out there and wait. I'll get him in the chair. You come in. We got a pretty good idea what's going to happen. Outside the room, the dentist says to his colleague, you know what, I've had enough. You just go in and pull the tooth of the guy in the chair there. So the colleague comes in with chloroform and a rag, at which point there's Ollie in the chair showing just how easy it is. When Ollie comes to, he sees Stan standing there with pliers. He jumps to the wrong conclusion. And he starts wrestling with Stan and grabs the laughing gas. Next thing you know, they're collapsed in a heap on the floor, which is kind of how they ended the bedroom scene too, collapsed in a heap on the floor. Only this time, the nurse comes in discovers the room is full of laughing gas. The receptionist stands up to look. The nurse kicks her in the behind, mirroring what we had in the previous scene. So you see these self-contained little bits, but they're all sort of interwoven and they refer back to each other. And I couldn't tell you whether or not this mirroring and deliberate repetition of segments from the other segments was deliberate. Did they say when they were writing the movie, oh, we'll do this and do this in the structure? Or was it just instinctive? They just put it there and, instinctively it worked. Anyway, once they leave the dentist's office under the influence of laughing gas, then we get the segment or the scene of them driving home. So we've got them trying to pull out of parallel parking, and they start to go forward, but instead they zoom backwards. So that mirrors the landlord starting to go forward but staggering back in the bedroom scene. During the traffic jam scene, they do get out in traffic, but they're in the midst of a huge traffic jam with a cop trying to control this. And the cop I consider to be his own little self-contained sequence in there, because there's numerous times where he loses his trousers, he gets run over, he gets stuck in the traffic jam, and I'm just watching it thinking, oh yeah, that happened before, we're building, and then at the very end the cop does what Ollie did previously, that is to take charge and solve it himself. He dumps them into the car, he gets behind the wheel and starts driving them out of there. Unfortunately, he drives them onto a street that's closed for construction, and there's a huge hole filled with water, drives the car into it, and the last we see is them and the car slowly sinking. So just like each of the previous scenes, it ends with the characters in a heap, basically, helpless. So that's the whole movie mapped out. And of course, the tricky bit is, as you're analyzing, try not to overthink it so you kill the jokes. I've managed to find a happy medium where, knowing this is the structure, I appreciate it more. So that's pretty much the structure, and it does work for almost every other slapstick film. Any questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So part of what we had a couple little audio problems while you were talking.
Okay.
We won't know how bad they are until we listen back to the whole piece. But
Hello?
Hello?
Dr. Edwards?
yes?
Oh,
Lost you
kind
there.
of froze up for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me? Or is it okay
Yep.
now?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so we definitely were having some audio problems there, Pat. So hopefully when we listen back, it's not going to be too much. It seemed like you only dropped out a couple times. But
Okay.
the one question I did have about the beginning, because it was a little garbled on my end, was
Okay.
you said that this concept came out of a class at the University of Texas?
No, Toronto. I went to University of Toronto.
The University of Toronto. And what was the goal? The goal was to try to, break down how an entire film was constructed?
Yes, it was, as Film 101 is basically a broad spectrum appreciation of film course. And, we learned about the structure of various films, but in this case, this one, because I've always loved slapstick comedy and silent comedy and such, this one just really clicked with me. And, I immediately grasped it and just took it and ran with it.
No, I thought it was fascinating to see it broken down like that, and how you can take the sequence of gags and map them out in that way. Especially how a lot of things are, I think the circles really work to kind of show how the gags end up being circular, and you keep coming back to the same gags again and again throughout the sequence. Like the water bottle, the everyone collapsing in a heap, whether it's on the bed or on the dentist, dentist's office floor or where have you. I'm kind of thinking of another Laurel and Hardy short, which name I'm not remembering right now, but it's the one with the really long traffic jam where...
Two Tars?
Two Tars, yes. And how if you map that out, it would almost be like you just keep coming back to the same gags again and again and again, but that repetition really works.
Yeah, and there's other Laurel and Hardy films that really build on it, such as Big Business, where, simple premise. They're door-to-door salesmen selling Christmas trees, and Stan's coat happens to get stuck in Finn's door. And then it just turns into tit for tat. They wreck something in his house, he wrecks something in their car, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds. And I love that sort of thing where you start so small and simple, and then gradually it just builds and builds into complete chaos.
And then go ahead, Pat, and take off your screen sharing at this point so that we can see you back on camera. But I loved that presentation, and one of the things that I definitely want to hear on the message boards when people finally see this episode of Fan Panels is a very interesting question you asked about whether or not this was instinctual or whether or not this was something that was creatively mapped out beforehand by teams like Laurel and Hardy and their gag crews. And it'll just be interesting to see what some of our other classmates might add to that question, because I don't think it has a definitive answer.
Yeah, I know that Stan was considered the best comedy writer in Hollywood in his day. And I know the appreciation of structure. For example, when they were doing Battle of the Century, and one of the writers said, "Oh, let's do a pie fight." All the writers just said, "Oh, are you kidding? It's been done to death. It just shows that you ran out of ideas." And then they thought, wait a minute, what if we took that concept and we built on it? We started small, and every single pie is thrown for a reason. Every single person who joins that fight has a reason to join it, and it's not just, oh, he threw one at me. And then you even get that beautiful little bit of business with Anita Garvin as a flapper. And Stan just, he spoke with her that morning. She was working on a picture with Charlie Chase, and he said, "Hey, how would you like to do a little favor for me?" So one take, it took her about 10 minutes, and that was it, and it stole the picture.
Nice.
No, absolutely.
Where she just slips and lands on it.
No, so thank you very much. I mean, that was absolutely fantastic presentation, and now let's switch gears and move over to Jason Tucker. And I have Jason's slides on my machine, so let me pull this up as he starts to introduce his topic. So go ahead as I get set up, Jason. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks. My topic is entitled Beyond Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd. Whenever you talk about slapstick comedy, particularly from the early years of cinema or the silent era, the three names that come to the fore, and sometimes even two names, are Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd. Even people who aren't fans of early cinema, aren't fans of silent slapstick, they know who Charlie Chaplin is. They've probably heard of Buster Keaton. Harold Lloyd maybe is a little bit on the edge there, but still kind of well-known enough. And then we also, throughout the history of comedy, certain names keep appearing where people know who they are. Laurel and Hardy, for example, the Three Stooges, Abbott and Costello. There's certain classic comedians who we keep hearing about, but then there's others who were, in their time, immensely popular, and they are virtually unknown today unless you are a student of film and a big fan of early cinema. The first one that we're going to talk about, and we have the slide up there right now, is John Bunny. John Bunny, at the time, was a very popular screen actor and comedian, a large man, kind of rotund. He did mostly comedy roles. He had some. The picture here is from Pickwick Papers, so it's a Dickens early silent Dickens. But he usually played kind of the husband or the father type of role, and he was so popular that when he died, and he died relatively early in the silent era, 1915, it made the news in Europe because of his popularity, how much he was loved as a film star. So in the case of John Bunny, and I don't think we have any John Bunny films in the sequence
No,
of
we
films,
don't.
but you can find them in the Internet Archive and various places if you just search for John Bunny. He is very funny. He kind of paved the way for Fatty Arbuckle and other comedians who use their girth as part of their shtick. But because of his leaving this realm so early, that's kind of a good reason why we don't remember John Bunny as well anymore. Let's go ahead and move to the. Go ahead. Did you have a comment?
Yes, John Bunny. His main co-star was Flora Finch, and she was very, very thin, spinster, angular. So there we have the same natural contrast as we would later have with Laurel and Hardy, where you've got one really, really skinny and angular person, another one who's quite rotund. So people like that, you just see them together and you instantly get a laugh.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the next one we have, we actually do have a picture in the Ouch Festival on TCM, and this is also available online for people who don't get TCM, and it's Tilly's Punctured Romance and the great Mabel Normand.
Mabel Normand is great. She worked for Max Sennett. In fact, there is a musical about her and Max Sennett. Oh, I would love to see Mac and Mabel sometime. That's actually the first place I ever heard of Mabel Normand, was in that musical Mac and Mabel by Jerry Herman. Also kind of forgotten itself, but Mabel Normand, hugely popular. She was Max Sennett's leading lady of comedy for, pretty much most of Keystone's existence until, again, she died at a relatively early age. She was, I believe, 37. She died in 1930. I think it was of tuberculosis and other health issues. Mm-hmm. And her relationship with Max Sennett was fraught with it was not a great relationship, but out of that we got some great films. Right,
but just to jump on that one, Jason, the other part that I just love about Mabel Normand is who she worked with in this era, because she worked with all of the major comedic talents that really are highly lauded today. So she appeared with Chaplin and Sennett and Fatty Arbuckle. And so she was, especially in her era, this was her popularity, which was at an absolute apex in the silent era. And it is always interesting that she isn't as remembered perhaps as some of her male co-stars.
Yeah, which again is kind of a tragedy where she worked with Charlie Chaplin. We remember Charlie Chaplin, but if we remember Mabel Normand at all, it may be, oh, that's the woman that was in those Charlie Chaplin movies.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. In the 80s, there was a satirical mockumentary called The Canadian Conspiracy, and it showed all the Canadians coming and working in Hollywood in comedy. Now what's interesting is Mabel Normand was of French-Canadian background. Max Sennett, born and raised in Quebec in Canada. Marie Dressler from Cobourg in Ontario, Canada. Wow. So it's, all these Canadians. I think even Samuel Goldfish, who later changed his name to Goldwyn, Samuel Goldfish, I think, was Canadian as well.
Fantastic. That is interesting. Was that made for like the CBC, that mockumentary?
I think it was. I believe it's on YouTube. I remember one gag was, where they were talking about Lorne Green, green card. Coincidence?
Nice.
The next person, Jason.
Go ahead. Okay, so next we have Harry Langdon. He's often put almost on an even pace with Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd. Frequently, if people talk about the big three, you know, they'll say, and if we added a fourth, it would be Harry Langdon. You can see he has a very striking appearance. That was pretty much his appearance in nearly all of his films. He was known for having this kind of baby face, and you know, all of the pratfalls and all of the slapstick issues that would happen to him, he would have this kind of innocent reaction throughout all of them. Again, very popular in his lifetime, and when he was working in silent films. I believe he did make the transition to sound, but not as successfully as some of the others. And again, that may be part of the reason why he is not as well remembered as Charlie Chaplin. Although, I mean, how many people remember Charlie Chaplin's sound films or Buster Keaton's sound films? You know, Chaplin and Keaton and Lloyd, they all transitioned into sound, but you know, they're really remembered for their silent films. Harry Langdon, again, if he's remembered by people who have done their research, done their homework, and he's not the same kind of household name as the others.
And Langdon's downfall. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Langdon's downfall actually. It appears, you know, the evidence suggests that it was because he was so dependent on his writers. I mean, Frank Capra was one of his writers. And then once he became really successful, he decided, oh, well, I can do this on my own. And then when he was coming up with his own plots and his own scripts, and he had his own film company, you know, it became immediately obvious that without his writers,
yeah,
you know, he was
no,
lost.
and I think that goes right, and I think that goes back, Pat, to the idea that you had previously, that teams like Chaplin and Keaton and Laurel and Hardy tended to not only be themselves great gag writers, but surrounded themselves by great gag writers, and that wasn't universally the case in this period,
Yeah.
as evidenced potentially by someone like Harry Langdon.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find a lot of his stuff. Kino has put out a number of his stuff on DVD. I'm not sure. Do we have a Langdon film in the lineup? That is too bad.
No, we don't.
I know that, you know, again, there's a lot that are in public domain, so you can definitely find them if you go hunting for them, and they are well worth it. In the golden age of comedy, which is the first thing that's showing up in the schedule, he is featured, and they have some of his, almost all of one of his shorts that's set on a train with sleep births.
Yeah.
So
It's a great point, Jason, because it really was the 1950s that was the kindest to Harry Langdon, starting with James Agee's 1949 Time magazine essay on comedy's greatest era. And it was actually that article in 49 that really created the idea that there was a big four, but really over the last 50 years we've whittled it back down to a big three. To jump to the next one, we got Larry Seaman next.
yes, Larry Seaman. He had a lot of intricate gags, kind of almost Keaton-esque, in terms of how he would put his gags together. I have to admit, I've not seen a lot of Larry Seaman myself, but he is a name that you will come across repeatedly when you're going through and reading about silent stars, especially ones who again were popular in their time, but are mostly forgotten now. I do know that his films were pretty expensive when he started directing his own, and some of his 2-reel films cost as much as a 5-reel feature film, which kind of worked against him. He also, I don't know if you would want to say this is one of his more famous roles, but I believe he played the Scarecrow in a not very well received Wizard of Oz film.
Yes. What happened was once he started his own production company, he he paid a fortune to get the rights to make a movie version of Wizard of Oz. And then he pretty much immediately threw out almost the entire story and came up with just his own story to showcase his wife, Dorothy Dwan, as Dorothy, and she was like a flapper. And just, massively messy, over-the-top gags. And Oliver Hardy was in it. He played the Tin Man character in it. There's some completely unacceptable racist type comedy in it. It's just, it's the approach of the plot is just the slenderest of threads just to throw a whole bunch of gags together. Any old excuse for a gag. And, that's why Larry Seaman's stuff kind of leaves me cold. But the fact that his gags were so intricate, I mean, he was a magician. He was a cartoonist. He actually got in trouble with the Magicians Union because he had a newspaper column where he would explain how all of these tricks were done with these incredibly intricate, detailed drawings that looked like they could have come out of a patent application. And
Wow.
and his, also his knowledge of this intricate stuff. There are those who say he did not die in 1928. There are those who say that he was so overwhelmed by financial problems and legal problems himself. They have some interesting arguments to support that theory, but again, there's no concrete proof. But it makes a heck of a story.
Oh, it does. And that leads us into our next person to consider beyond Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd, and that is a person who is very highly regarded in his day, Charlie Chase.
Yes, and Charlie Chase, he worked for Hal Roach. He worked, I believe, with a lot of other comedians at the time. Laurel and Hardy were part of the Hal Roach studio. And he has some of his work is out on DVD from Kino. I have a couple of his sets. I haven't worked my way through all of them yet. I think part of the reason why he maybe hasn't carried through to the modern day is you can see in his picture there, he's very non-assuming. He doesn't have the iconic look that Chaplin has with the little tramp character, or Keaton with the great stone face, or Harold Lloyd even with just his glasses, his spectacles character. You see a picture of Charlie Chase and you're just like, oh, who's that guy? And then you watch the films and, they're good films. Pip from Pittsburgh, that's one of the ones that we're going to watch as part of the course. So I think in the case of Charlie Chase, it really is that, while he was very successful and he continued to work, through into the sound era, he just isn't remembered in much the same way that a lot of people from that era aren't remembered. A lot of actors and actresses aren't remembered because he doesn't have that kind of hook that the others had.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I watched the Pit from Pittsburgh, of course, in preparation for this course, and I was struck by the sophistication of his verbal humor and the complications of his visual gags. I've actually picked him out for a daily dose of doozy in the second week of the course so we can analyze one of his extended gags in more detail. But I can't put my finger on it either, but he has what I would say a datedness that I don't associate with other verbally gifted comedians of the 1930s, such as W.C. Field or the Marx Brothers. So it is odd that there's something that you can see why he would have been very popular, but also why he might not connect as much with today's audiences.
Yeah, I think I might know why. His comedy is almost like a domestic comedy of manners. So, he's like your average Joe, domestic, husband, all the rest of it. So his films, they're almost like a sitcom and a comedy of manners, and we don't know people like him anymore. It's, that may have been the norm back then, but people aren't like that anymore. It just seems so distant and dated.
That makes sense. So how about Lloyd Hamilton, Jason?
Well, Lloyd Hamilton, he's a name that I came across as I was kind of researching this panel and just looking for, forgotten comedians. And I have not seen a whole lot by him, and most of his work is now missing, sadly, as so much early cinema is. But he was very well regarded by other comedians at the time. Some of the things that I found were quotes by Charlie Chaplin saying that something along the lines of, "I wish that my comedy was like his," or something like that. And so, with someone like Lloyd Hamilton, where other comedians were hailing him, I would have to think that part of the reason why he is mostly forgotten is that most of his body of work is no longer available. And from what it sounds like, the ones that are available are not considered his best work either.
Okay. And so we'll wrap up with Wheeler and Woolsey.
And I love Wheeler and Woolsey. Oh my goodness. I wish that they were as well known as the Marx Brothers and Abbott and Costello and all the ones that we still remember today. I have been proselytizing about these guys for about the past 2 years when I first started seeing their films on a streaming site that is of it. I don't know if I can mention it, considering it might be considered a competitor, but they they had some of these Wheeler and Woolsey movies, and I checked them out, and I'm like, oh my god, these guys are hysterical. And I'm so glad that Hips Hips Hooray is going to be in the lineup. I'm not sure if that's the one that has the song sequence that is set. There, those two and a couple of female co-stars are in an office, and during the course of this musical number, they destroy the office. Everything is shattered, and it's hysterical. But I don't remember if it's this one or not. But the one on the left in the black and white photo with the rather dramatic part in the hair is Robert Woolsey. You can see that he died relatively early in 1938. And then the one on the right with the big kind of baby face smile is Burt Wheeler. It's when you guys watch it, you're going to see that their characters are so well put together, and that they carry these characters through all kinds of different movies. If you get a chance, along with Hips Hips Hooray, I highly recommend Diplomaniacs. Now, it being the 30s, you do have to kind of, watch it with it was a different time. Things were not as other countries and characters and races were not as handled as delicately as we handle them now. And I think part of the reason why they are not as remembered is not just that, but their humor, while I find it hysterical, is of a very it's very corny. It's a lot of plays on words. It's a lot of innuendo. Most of their stuff is pre-code, and you'll get lots of double entendres. And Hips Hips Hooray is definitely one of the ones that is like this. And actually, while we're on this, if you look in the poster, you can see Thelma Todd listed, which I did not mention, but Thelma Todd is also another comedian who is virtually forgotten today, but was hugely popular, and her death is kind of a big Hollywood mystery as well. So, when we watch Hips Hips Hooray, you won't just be seeing Wheeler and Woolsey, but you'll also be seeing Thelma Todd.
Yeah, and I meant to mention this as well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Jason, and that's what's fun about having these fan panels where we can in real time have a conversation about this. Thelma Todd was also the lead comedian in The Pip from Pittsburgh. And so it's a link between Charlie Chase and Wheeler and Woolsey. And so, all these things have really cool connections that we'll get into during the course. But if I did have, like, my one pick the click, of a film that I don't think is widely known, that is one of our 56 films in the TCM Festival. It is Hips Hips Hooray. When I saw it in preparation for this course, I loved it. It's my type of gag and verbal comedy. And I also think it'll appeal to a lot of members of the TCM audience who like the pre-code era, because I agree with you. A lot of their jokes are racy and have double entendres. And this was a comedy troupe that probably did suffer a little bit more when the Hollywood Code would clamp down on such language.
Yeah. Oh, and Thelma Todd, she was actually part of a comedy duo with Patsy Kelly on the Hal Roach lot. They tried to do sort of like a female version of Laurel and Hardy, only it didn't really work. And I've seen some of those pictures, and, you know, it all seems to boil down to Laurel and Hardy are Laurel and Hardy. And maybe a little bit of, well, it's not quite as funny when women are doing this same stuff. As much as it pains me to say that, it's, you know, it's not quite so-called women's comedy. It's just, it's like the difference between the female version of The Odd Couple and The Odd Couple. It just doesn't work as well when it's women doing it versus if it's men.
So any final thoughts there? No, great observations, Pat. Any
Thanks.
final thoughts there, Jason, on like the big takeaway for other students in the class about maybe seeking out these forgotten comedians?
Sure. One of the things. Ooh, I'm getting a little bit of an echo there. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I don't think. Nope, that's not it.
How's that? Is that better, Jason?
Let me see. I'm still getting my sound back a few seconds after I say things.
That's not too bad on our end if you just had maybe just a quick wrap up there.
Sure. One of the resources that I used for this is a blog called Silentology. It's https://Silentology. It's, you know, silent, OLOGY.wordpress.com. It's actually a blog that's written by someone who lives here in Minneapolis, where I'm from. And during the month of August, Leah, the writer for this blog, she did a whole sequence about forgotten silent comedians. And she went even further than I did with Harry Langdon and Larry Seaman and Charlie Chase. So my takeaway is go and seek these out. They're there. There's plenty of places online you can find them, Internet Archive, and, you know, show these people some love.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. This was our first fan panel. I'm hoping to host 4 more, but I hope that this again brought in a wider range of discussions than we probably could have just had if we tried to do this by email or by just the discussion board. So I want to thank again our 2 presenters, the first one being Pat Rosebank and the second one being Jason Tucker. And so that will do it for us tonight. And you know, definitely after you watch this fan panel, jump onto the TCM message boards and continue the discussions either about the strategies in comedy writing that she identified and associated with the Laurel and Hardy film Make 'Em Laughing, or the conversations around forgotten comedians of the silent era. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.